Well, hello everyone. It's so nice to be with you again today. I am going to start a screen share so that we can get on with the subject that I want to bring with you today. We're going to look at the story of the wise men who came to visit the infant Jesus. On Friday of this past week, the ancient feast day of Epiphany took place. Now, in the Orthodox churches, the name used there is actually theophany. But both of these names mean the same thing. It means the appearance. So these words historically have meant the appearance or revelation of a deity, the coming of the Lord Jesus Christ on earth. And so traditionally, Epiphany has been seen as a commemoration of the visit of the wise men to the child Jesus. And we read the story in Matthew's Gospel, chapter 2, verses 1 and 2. Now, when Jesus was born in Bethlehem of Judea, in the days of Herod the king, behold, there came wise men from the east to Jerusalem, saying, where is he that is born King of the Jews? For we have seen his star in the east and are come to worship him. Now we could ask the question, who were these wise men? Now in a Greek New Testament, the word would be magoi. We have translated that as magi. Now, these were men who studied astrology and astronomy. We might be horrified by the fact that they studied astrology, but in fact, in those days, there was a lot more of what we would call astronomy involved in their studies. Now, the Magi first appear about the 7th century BC in the Median Empire, but by the time of the birth of Jesus, they were an ancient priestly caste, and they lived in the Parthian Empire, which was a large area to the east of the eastern frontier of the Roman Empire. And of course, there were many legends that have grown up around these wise men. And the first legend really is that there were 3 wise men. The truth is, we actually don't know how many there were. The number 3 has come about because of the 3 gifts that were given to Jesus: gold, frankincense, and myrrh. But we don't know the quantity of those gifts, or even if Jesus was only given 1 of each. There's no way to know. And in fact, Christian art of the first few centuries shows various numbers of magi, from the number 2, in fact, to the number 12. One thing we can say, I think quite safely, is that they would have been accompanied by a large entourage. Another legend is that they rode camels. Whenever you see paintings from this time period, if you saw a movie made in this time period, they're always riding camels. However, in northern Arabia, where these men came from, the people typically rode Arabian horses, because by the time of Jesus, camels were seen as pack animals, but wealthy travelers used the more comfortable and faster Arabian horse. Legend number 3 is that they were kings. We sing, don't we? We 3 kings of Orient are. And that legend has been around a long, long time. But of course, Matthew simply calls them wise men. After Jesus had been born in Bethlehem of Judea, in the days of King Herod, wise men from the east arrived in Jerusalem. So we don't know exactly how many there were, and we certainly can't say they were kings. However, recent scholarship has suggested they were of noble birth, educated, wealthy, and influential. And in fact, some have said that instead of being kings, they were most likely king makers. In other words, those who had an influence over the choice of a king. They obviously knew something of the Hebrew scriptures because they recognized the star as something important. And in Numbers 24, verse 17, we read, "A star shall come out of Jacob, a scepter shall rise out of Israel." The fourth legend was that the wise men came, one from India, one from Africa, and one from Persia. That was quite a later tradition, but it is most likely that they came from what is now the northwestern part of Saudi Arabia, which in those days was in fact the kingdom of Nabatea. And the capital of the kingdom of Nabatea was Petra. Now, Arabia was known for its vast wealth from the gold mines of Africa, as well as the Boswellia and Camphora trees, from which frankincense and myrrh are derived. So let's have a look at the gifts of these wise men. The first one, gold. Gold for a king. Gold is obvious, really, because it's been seen as a valuable commodity for thousands of years. It's rare, it's difficult to accumulate. It's easy to work into shapes or into very thin sheets or even wire, and it doesn't rust or corrode. And we see it's used continually in the Old Testament books of the Bible, and especially in the description given for the building of the temple and the Ark of the Covenant in Exodus 25. In fact, Solomon's vast wealth is described in the amount of gold he accumulated. So gold in the Old Testament was the symbol of kings. And then we have frankincense. And frankincense was seen as a gift for a high priest. The high priest of Israel burned incense, frankincense, in the temple on the Day of Atonement. And one particular interpretation of this act is actually quite interesting, because it was believed that the smoke of the incense was intended to fill the Holy of Holies and to hide God who dwelt on the mercy seat between the cherubim. And the smoke would hide God in such a way that the priest could be there in the presence of God without dying, because the belief was to see God was to die. And the high priest was saved from death by the incense. And to burn anything else apart from the prescribed incense, or to use any banned source of flame, was strange fire and punishable by death, which we can see in Leviticus chapter 10 and verse 1. Therefore, when the Magi brought frankincense to Jesus, they proclaimed him to be their high priest. And the importance of that gift is difficult to overstate, because in the Old Testament tradition, the kings came from the tribe of Judah, while the priests came from the tribe of Levi, and the two powers were to be kept separate. However, in the birth of Jesus, the two powers were combined, and the presence of these two gifts together foreshadows Jesus' role as both king and priest for his people. In Hebrews chapter 8 and verse 1, we read, "We have such a high priest who has sat down on the right hand of the throne of the majesty in heaven." And the third gift, of course, was myrrh. Myrrh was seen as something that was used as a sacrifice. It's the most solemn, but it's a prophetic gift. It was used as an embalming oil. So myrrh symbolizes the Jesus's appearance and his mortality as a man. So they were bringing a gift to the Messiah that proclaimed in reality his suffering and his death. And of course, after Jesus died on the cross, we know that his body was embalmed. And there came also Nicodemus, which at the first came to Jesus by night, and brought a mixture of myrrh and aloes, about 100-pound weight. Then took they the body of Jesus and wound it in linen clothes with the spices, as the manner of the Jews is to bury. John chapter 19, verses 39 to 40. Now, there are two interesting connections to myrrh which are found within the New Testament. The first is that the name Mary comes from the same root word as the word myrrh. And Mary's name also turns out to be prophetic. When she presented Jesus at the temple, Simeon prophesies over Jesus and tells Mary that a sword will pierce her own heart as well. And a second use of the word myrrh is found in the book of Revelation. When John is given the 7 letters to 7 churches, there is one church whose name and whose letter tells of suffering and persecution, even to the point of death. And that church is Smyrna. And the name Smyrna came from the same root as the word myrrh. And so in this last gift, the Magi are proclaiming that all 3 powers that God had ordained in the Old Testament had come together in the birth and person of Jesus Christ and would be fulfilled. God proclaimed Jesus to be our King, the one who would rule over his people, and indeed the whole of creation forever and ever. Frankincense announced that he would be our high priest. And finally, myrrh reveals to us that our King and priest, God forever, was somehow a mortal man who would also serve as our prophet and a man who would die in the place of sinners. So this is the story of the wise men and of the gifts that they brought to the Lord Jesus Christ. I pray and hope that you have found this an interesting subject to study. Thank you, and God bless you.